We're not going to put up something that maybe permanently keeps the water out of Davenport, but also changes the whole dynamic of our riverfront and causes problems downriver. It will be explored, undoubtedly. I think that's one of our responsibilities as elected officials, is to explore these operations, what they cost, because I think the number is going to be staggering, first of all. But also, is that really what the will of the community is, and the people that have businesses along there, now when they look out their businesses and see the river, potentially not be able to do that and see a wall. Hold on one second. Yes, ma'am? Well, I mean, that's kind of like after you should have worn a helmet when you're riding a bike and you land on your head. I think at that point, yeah, no. But in my case, no. I realize, as I've talked to mayors all along the river, they have varying techniques, and we've all been discussing, and vigorously discussing, other resiliency efforts that deals with more water. As example, Nahant Marsh, the amount of water that is dealt with at Nahant Marsh prevents it's unbelievable versus letting it even flood more. So is there a way to create some areas like that that can handle water that comes out and be able to lessen the pressure on the city? Well, as I said, this is something, in any case this comes up, we have responsibility to look into that in more detail, find the facts on both sides of that equation, and then report that. So at this point, this is hard to have this discussion in the middle of this because it looks apparent. Everybody would say it would be a lot better if there was no flooding. But in the last 26 years, this hasn't happened. So we're going to try to work through that, find out the answers, and then give a report back to the community. Well, you'll have to connect me with those folks because as I've walked along, sure, there are some people that have said, build a wall, and that's been a problem, the thought of that. But as an example, and others have said, a couple of businesses that I've talked to, not a lot because they're in the middle of fighting the efforts and doing what they're doing right now. So we will continue to talk that. That'll be an open dialogue, and we'll be able to find more information as we move forward. Well, I think it's definitely having an impact on the riverfront businesses. But as we looked around there, most of that is either flood protected or a relatively, and again, any one that's jeopardized is too many. I appreciate that. But for the most part, we can, most of those businesses has stayed operational, and within, as we talked about before, if it gets down, loses 5 or 6 feet on the flood level, they'll be back in operational again very quickly. So it's not that something we're not taking lightly, but we're also looking at the entire community, and we wanted to make sure that people from the outside have a tendency to look in and think that the city of Davenport is underwater. It's a portion of it, an important portion of it, but it's just a portion of it. But we understand we have responsibility to everybody in the community as well. So we'll look into that as well. I'm not sure if we have someone that can give us specifics of that. We can find more information. I don't have that with me in front of me. But we'll find if we can find more information of that as well. I know a lot of them were made flood resilient. Like you said, the Ground Transportation Center, the Figgy, all of those are open for business today. And like I said, the Barrel House is planning on opening, at least he's shooting for opening on Friday. So those are businesses along that, along 2nd Street and beyond. So we'll look into that. That's something we'll have to take into consideration as we look at the big picture. Well, we'll look at all, if I say we're going to explore it, we'll explore it in detail on both sides of the issue, find out the results of that. The issue also that building something like this also is related to the Corps of Engineers. There's a whole bunch of people that are involved. It is not a singular decision that the city decides to do something. They have to work with a lot of other organizations, first of all. Secondly, to look at the costs related to that is something we have to deal with, and basically compare that to what potential annual costs there may be as well. So all of those are taken, and what that impact has on the overall riverfront and the development for the future. All of those will be explored and will be part of what our long-term decision will be. So thank you for the question. Right. Chief?
Paul Sikorsky, the police chief. So we do have a security and safety plan in place. We have one as normal operations for floods every year, and then we make adjustments to them. And just this morning, the assistant chief and the patrol captain sent me an update on what our adjustments are for this particular one. So yeah, that's a concern of ours. We have a plan in place, and we have officers, the businesses, owners in our downtown area and the outlying areas that are affected as well see our police cars and officers more often because that is a concern for us. And we have had conversations, Dave has at EMA with National Guard. If those assets are needed, they're certainly available.
You know, to that end as well, follow up also, last night I was down there fairly late, and as I parked to check and see what was happening in some of those affected areas, there were people driving around where I was parked well off close to the water, and somebody drove right around and went in trying to drive through the water, and they were stopped. But I think as well as one of the things that came up today, there's a heavy piece of equipment that's blocking off the street, so that doesn't happen. So I think there are steps being taken. Chief's got plans in place, but also our Public Works Department, overall city has some plans as well. Any other questions? Dave?
Obviously, we have a community organization active in disaster committee here, COED. It's also called VOED at the national level. There's a state organization, the Iowa Disaster Human Resources Council. And so that brings together nonprofits that have resources that they can bring to bear. So you'll see those nonprofits, those national VOED partners, the Red Cross, Salvation Army, be a part of that. But we'll also bring in faith organizations that have resources to bring to bear. Should FEMA decide to give us a declaration to come to town, you could have their resources there as well. Small Business Administration could be a part of that. It's any number of organizations. Community Action of Eastern Iowa is the servicing organization for the Iowa's Individual Assistance Program, so they would certainly be a part of that. Our Volunteer Registration Center would have folks there as well, so that people could sign up for assistance or volunteer at that location. So it's a one-stop shop where impacted residents can go to look into and apply for assistance that might be available. And it could be any number, anywhere from 8 or 10 organizations up to several dozen organizations.
As Nicole's coming up, all the areas along there are being monitored now, all along the entire edge. So maybe, Nicole, you want to add anything to that?
Sure. So any other high levels of creeks or things like that, we are monitoring any significant amount of rain. The system is just honestly at its peak right now. So any significant amount of rain could push creeks over. So everyone really should just be diligent in monitoring the flood conditions in their property right now. The temporary flood wall has fallen, so the water is stabilized around the area where it was going to land once that wall was breached. It will likely just stay there until it goes back into its banks at this point. There's really, the only remaining flood barrier we have up was just erected yesterday in the East Village in anticipation of a 22-foot flood, and we do not have concerns about that. Correct.
Excuse me, let me clarify. Entire Casco barrier right there.
At that area, there was about a 1 block section that fell. The section that remained standing, the water obviously went around it.
Yes, ma'am.
I think at the time that press release was sent, that was accurate. I think we did have 3 individuals who did spend the night in the shelter here in Davenport. Obviously, there were additional people, but they made other arrangements with relatives or chose to find other accommodations. But 3 people are currently in that shelter.
I don't have an accurate number of all the residents that were displaced. Those were just the residents that we helped out of the area.
Did anybody stay?
I don't believe so. I think utilities have been turned off to all those buildings, so I believe that those buildings are all empty at this point. We have had inquiries about folks returning, whether temporarily to retrieve personal possessions, and inquiring when they can get back into their buildings. As I said earlier, many of these buildings have 18 inches of water in front of them. So if they have a second floor apartment, they're high and dry, their property's not in jeopardy. But we have concerns, obviously Mid-American Energy has concerns with restoring utilities, and we have concerns that we're going to want to make sure that those properties are properly inspected before we allow people to take up housing again in those.
I get that.
Yep.
There's actually the performance group has a trailer right out in front of one of the buildings at Barrel House. So they took all their stuff, put it in there, kept it frozen as they move forward. So I think it's another one of those community coming together and find ways to take care of all the particular situations. Yes, sir. I don't have any specific ones that kind of predated this group, actually. But as you were mentioning, obviously the work that was done at the ballpark, that's a city-owned ballpark, isn't it, the Modern Woodman Park? So that area was dealt with, and we've been able to get in and out of there, changing situations with Canadian Pacific raising the track. It changed the situation, and we've dealt with that. And actually, the Ground Transportation Center was flood protected as well by just the way it was developed and designed. Figge Art Museum was built with the idea that Figge's open today and you can go in and use it. The lower area of the parking below it obviously is not parkable at that point, but you can still go in and use it. So I think we've just been sensitive to the idea that as we try to be resilient on our riverfront, people have developed resilient plans to be able to stay operational. And there are some others related to pumping in the area, like in the Garden Addition, some of those areas, and I know Alderman Dunn, who's the alderman in that ward, is there checking it every night himself and make sure all the pumps are working, as an example. So once we see something, we respond to it, deal with it, and new development is being able to help with it. Yes, ma'am. Anything else? Nicole? Yeah.
Yeah, we are monitoring it. We have employees that are actually in there overnight 24/7 right now, monitoring and taking specific measurements of different things so that we don't have to close that gate until it becomes absolutely necessary to close it to protect the actual infrastructure of the facility. So the gate is technically still open right now, but we are very close to that line and monitoring it minute by minute. Yeah. Yeah, Yeah, if the gate's closed, it could potentially cause sewer backups depending on what capacity is in the rest of the system. But we don't know exactly specifically where that would happen. Like I said, we are monitoring it minute by minute. Literally with the river level here just about cresting, we're hopeful that we don't have to. So my understanding, and we've had a lot of changes, obviously, in the collection system and the plant itself since 1993. My understanding is that in 1993, at the 22.6, they did not close it at that point. But again, with changes in the system, I can't guarantee what level we would have to do that at this point.
When you say down at the temporary flood barrier that they're being monitored constantly, who's monitoring that and what they're looking for?
So and I'm now referring to the ones in the East Village, the ones that were on River Drive. It was our public works staff. We were basically looking for any sort of seepage, things like that that would indicate something was going wrong.
And that's 2024.
Correct.
Has there been any increase in the number of people that are monitoring, or has it been steady? How many people are monitoring?
So we generally, it's one employee per pump or location like that can visually inspect and see the entire area. So that's generally been around 20 employees that are required at any given time.
Any additional questions? If not, do we have instructions for any future media inquiries for the city? Not at this time? Okay, through the city's communications director, you can also direct inquiries outside of the city of Davenport to Scott County Emergency Management Agency. As I said, we continue to work with other communities outside of Davenport. If there are any media inquiries for those other communities, please work through my office rather than responding. Those cities all have very small staff. If there are no other questions, I'd like to thank you all for attending this morning.